So, a very warm welcome, my dear couples and families, to this talk on the sacrament of marriage. Now, the sacrament of marriage is one of the most beautiful sacraments that we have in the church because there are so many beautiful aspects that are reflected in it. But I will not be able to reflect on all those aspects, so I have decided to choose a few aspects which are of great value and which are foundational to understanding the sacrament of marriage. Now, one very important thing is that we are celebrating the year of the family. And therefore, by having a talk on the sacrament of marriage, it gives you, my dear couples, an opportunity to understand and to renew your commitment to each other. And the other side, it also gives you an opportunity to understand your mission as a couple and as a family. And in order to help us do that, I would like to refer to the encyclical of Pope Francis, which is Amoris Laetitia, which simply means the joy of love. Okay. So I will try to go through the talk referring to some parts of this encyclical, and I will even read them out so that you understand what it is, and I will try to connect it all in the context of what we're talking about, which is simply the sacrament of marriage. Now, something very important is that when we talk about the sacrament of marriage, we need to first understand what does the sacrament mean. Sacrament simply is the presence of Jesus in our lives. But with the sacrament where we experience the presence of Jesus in our life, there's also the mission dimension, which I will basically talk about a little in an elaborate way as we go through this talk. Because these two, the presence of Jesus and mission, are the foundation of any sacrament, and definitely all the more the foundation of the sacrament of marriage. Now, one definition of a sacrament is that it is an outward sign of an inward grace. So the ritual that we have for any sacrament is more the outward sign to explain and to give us that experience of God's grace within us. So you have, say, baptism, where it is welcoming the newborn into the faith. The grace of God is within this child, but there's also the mission, which is this child is expected to grow up in the knowledge and understanding of the faith. Later on in this person's life, you have the sacrament of confirmation, where this particular child now becomes an adult, and therefore they expect that this person as an adult to some extent will be able to understand his or her responsibility to the church. And there are many of these sacraments that have this, but there are two very important sacraments, which is marriage and holy orders. And these are also sacraments that talk about the presence of God, but very strongly reflect the mission of our faith, which is to spread the love of God. Now, when we talk about the sacrament, okay, now let us get more towards the sacrament of marriage. It's one thing to experience the presence of God in our lives, but what do we do with this? This presence of God needs to be shared. Okay? And that is something very important when we talk about the sacrament of marriage. Now, one very important thing here is, as it is mentioned in Amoris Laetitia 72, where we get an understanding of this sacrament, which is the sacrament of marriage is not a social convention, an empty ritual, or merely the outward sign of a commitment. The sacrament is a gift given for the sanctification and salvation of the spouses, since their mutual belonging is a real representation through the sacramental sign of the same relationship between Christ and the church. Okay? So this is something we are talking about. It's not just experiencing the presence of God, but there's something very sacred about the sacrament, because you are reflecting in the relationship that you share with each other as spouses and as a family. You are reflecting the same relationship that Christ has with the church. Now, the definition of marriage according to canon law is very important, and Amoris Laetitia has basically just expanded this or explained it in a simpler way, which is simply, it's a covenantal bond. It is for the well-being of spouses. It is for the procreation and above all for the upbringing of children. But the very fact of the presence of Christ in the sacrament automatically makes it something very sacred and something very a chance to experience God's grace. Now, there's another point which they bring up both in 61 and 62, The first one, number 61, talks about it, and which is something which Amoris Laetitia talks about quite through the entire encyclical, is simply that marriage is a gift. Not only is it a vocation, but it is a gift. Okay? And the family also is a gift. And therefore, what they try to compare it to is that the whole concept of indissolubility and unity. Okay, these are properties of marriage. Now, what does it mean? Indissolubility means cannot be broken. That's what we understand when we say covenant. Cannot be broken. Okay, and unity means it's binding. It keeps the couple together, keeps the family together, because it's a commitment that we have made to each other, a commitment that you have made to each other. So, a very simple way of understanding is if these two were rings, it's something like this. You can't break this, you can't separate them without one or both being damaged. Okay? That's the covenantal bond, and that's what you're trying to say. But what Amoris Laetitia 62 points to is sometimes we consider this a burden, as they would say, in the context of the indissolubility of marriage, which it cannot be broken, states that this does not mean it is a yoke or burden, but rather a gift given to those who are joined in marriage. And that is the foundation of the sacrament of marriage, is that it is a gift. Okay? Explain this a little more when I talk about vocation of marriage. But as a sacrament, it is a gift from God. And that is something that has to always be cherished, and that is something that has to always be the foundation if, you know, sometimes you have experienced struggles and difficulties in your marriage. Now, the Eucharist is the primordial sacrament, the main sacrament, because it is pointing to something very important, which is the presence of Jesus in our life. But not only understanding the presence of Jesus in our life, we're also called to go forth and reflect Jesus in our lives. Okay? And that's very importantly seen also in the sacrament of marriage, which is to be able to experience Jesus and go forth and share him with others. Now, two very important things come out in numbers 63 and 66. In 63, they give the comparison to the Trinity, which means your marriage of unity should reflect the unity of the Trinity. That is your foundation of unity. So the way the Trinity organizes itself and lives in unity and love and care for each other, that's the same way the family is expected to live. That's the same way couples are expected to live. And they give you this wonderful example of the Holy Family of Nazareth. So in 66, you will have it mentioned here that the Nazareth, referring to the Holy Family, teaches us the meaning of family life, its loving communion, its simple and austere beauty, its sacred and unbreakable character. From the brief information that we get in the Gospels about the Holy Family, we will see that they have experienced a lot of hardships in their life. They did experience a lot of struggles, but they always were united. They always had that bond of unity, and no matter what happened, that is what gave them the strength to basically understand life and to move ahead in God's plan in their life, fulfilling God's plan in their life. Now, one important thing also here is that Jesus came to give us a human experience of the divine love of God in our life. Okay? But in order to really experience this, we need His grace. Because everything is founded on grace. We experience Him through His grace, and we are able to share Him with others in and through His grace. So as it is mentioned here in number 63, through His church, Christ bestows on the marriage and the family the grace necessary to bear witness to the love of God and to live the life of communion. Okay? So it is through His grace that you experience His presence, and through His grace that you're able to share this presence and love with each other, and by being in communion with family and society. Now we come to something very important. Okay? So it is a question of the love and grace, but also the opportunity to share it. Now when we talk about the sacrament of marriage, we have to look at it also from the perspective of a vocation. Because this has got a very important role to play in the church. When we talk about the sacraments in the church, where we have 5 sacraments that are there for all, these 2 sacraments of marriage and holy orders is a choice that is given to us. And we can't choose both. Which means both of them have a certain amount of sanctity, Both of them have a certain amount of importance in the church. Okay? Both are ways in which we experience the presence of God, and both are ways in which we're able to share this presence with others. Okay. Now, so in other words, when we look at a vocation, we have to understand two dynamics or two aspects. First, a vocation is a call from God, and second, it has a purpose or what we call the mission. I think I've already tried to speak about the mission, which is sharing this love of Christ with others. But as we go through this talk further, I will try to even give it a more stronger focus, which is the presence of God and the mission. But let's come back to this whole concept of it being a gift. Now, Amoris Laetitia number 72 states that marriage is a vocation inasmuch as it is a gift and a specific response to a specific call. Okay, so now you have seen this. It's a call, it's a vocation. Okay, now what is this call? The call is simply to experience the presence of Jesus in our life, as a couple in your life, and as a family in your life. And then, when you're experiencing this presence, you find ways in which you are able to share this with others, and therefore, by doing this, you are able to reach out to others and give them the presence of Jesus that you are experiencing in and through each other. Okay? Now, one very important thing over here is the gift. See, have you ever asked yourself this question? There are so many people who God could have given you as a spouse, who God could have given you as a family. But the very fact that you have this particular person in your life as a spouse or this particular family in your life, it simply means that this is God's gift to you. For him, he believes that it is through this spouse, through this family, that you are able to experience him and you will have the opportunities to share this love with others. So that is what he's one way of understanding this gift, is that there's a specific purpose to have this particular spouse and this particular family in your life. Okay. Now, in other words, it's saying the best way for you to experience God and to love him back through others is through this spouse, is through this family. Okay. That's what we mean again when we say it's a gift. Now, one important thing is when God calls, he calls us in our imperfection. So whether it's the sacrament of marriage or the sacrament of holy orders, you are called in imperfection. But it is the process of growth through the relationship with Jesus that changes us. So it is through the relationship with Jesus that we are able to move from imperfection to perfection in his love. One very beautiful example are the disciples, but more specifically, Saint Peter. Now, if we look at his initial life with Jesus, very enthusiastic and all, but it was a very imperfect love. He had not really grown in this love because he had not actually grown in his relationship with Jesus. It's after he was actually experiencing the real depth of the love of Jesus in his life, he was transformed by it. And he was able to grow in this perfection where he went from denying Jesus to dying for Jesus. Okay? That's the transformation of the love he experienced through his relationship with Jesus. So when we talk about marriage as a vocation, as a gift from the Lord, it simply means it is a gift given to you where God believes that the two of you as spouses and as a family will be able to grow from imperfection, or rather move from imperfection to perfection. So you are able to love God in and through each other. Okay? And this is something very important to understand, the vows that you made. When you said I do to each other at the altar, you actually said I do to Jesus in your life. You said I do to receiving his love, and you also said I do to loving him back in and through the other person. So his love comes to you through your spouse and through your family, and you love God back in and through your spouse and through your family. Okay? So that is where the gift is also so important. Now, love cannot be experienced in a vacuum, neither can it be shared in a vacuum. And that is why you have each other, that is why you have your family. And that is why the family is so important And the sacrament of marriage has so much of depth, and grace is something that reflects the grace of the Lord in the life of the church. Okay? Now, chapter 4, one way of putting it is simply this: at the end of the day, what keeps the family together in communion is love, which means the entire sacrament of marriage is founded on love. So when we talk about the presence of Jesus in our life, we simply mean the presence of love in our life, because Jesus is love. So that is something that you are also something so beautiful, because that's a gift to be able to experience love in your life. Now, what is this love? Because very often when we talk about love, we talk about the sacrificing love of Jesus, that is the agape love of Jesus, which is when we celebrated Good Friday, we saw that. Okay? Now, this love that has come to us, okay, is a mission. And the love that He has, the mission that He gave us at the time when we celebrated Monday Thursday, we got that mission, which is simply love one another as I have loved you. And that is the love that we are called to have. That is the love that we are called to share. Okay, that's the mission. But it's not an easy love. Okay? Because first of all, it is not easy to practice this love and love the way Jesus did. But Jesus has shown us something very important, which is through His grace, it is possible. It doesn't mean it is easy to love the way He loves us, but it is possible, and that is why grace is such an important aspect in any sacrament, and above all, in the life of the church. Now, what is this love? What is this agape love that we are talking about? How do we understand it? What do we need to do to practice it? And that's where Amoris Laetitia gives us something very beautiful, because chapter 4, at least the first part of chapter 4, talks about love. Okay? So while chapter 3 talks about the vocation of marriage, chapter 4, at least the first part, talks about love. And they have elaborated one very important passage, which is 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 to 7. Now this is something very beautiful, and I would like to read it. Okay? Before I come to that, there's another important point that they have mentioned over here, which is something similar to what I've just shared with you. Amoris Laetitia number 89 states that fidelity and mutual self-giving cannot happen without the strengthening and development of family love. Okay? Of family love, sorry. So it cannot happen without the strengthening and development of family love. Okay? This is something very beautiful and very important, which means this so-called move from imperfection to perfection happens in the family, and therefore it's important to understand what love we are called to share with each other, because once we understand that, we can find ways in which we can make it a reality. So coming back to the passage I spoke about, and that's what I will read. Okay, love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, and it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. I think no other passage can give us such a wonderful explanation of this love that we are called to share with each other, and you and your couples and families are called to share with one another in that setting as a couple or as a family. Okay? Now, each of this is a task in itself, and each particular characteristic mentioned requires grace to practice. To be faithful, it's not easy to be faithful. It's not easy to be kind, especially when things are difficult, especially when the other person has not reflected or responded in kindness towards us. But that's where the grace of God is so important. That's what I mentioned. The grace of God is important in your life as a couple, in your life as a family, and in the life of the church. Okay? But it's your task. See, when you make that commitment at the altar to say I do to each other, you can't just drop it, as the thing says. It's not some kind of an empty promise that you've made at the altar. You have said yes to Jesus. And if He continues to love us, and we have just seen that during the Easter Triduum, it's our responsibility and commitment to love Him back. And you as a couple get each other to do that, and as a family you'll get each other to do that too. So one way of practicing this love is to choose these characteristics and see how can we as a family or as a couple live out this particular characteristic in our lives. You may choose, say, a particular week or a month where you just say, okay, let us say, for example, is kind, is not envious. So what are the ways in which you can practice kindness with each other? It's an effort. And if you truly are committed to this task of moving towards perfection in the love of Christ for each other, and through that for Jesus Himself, then you will be willing to make the commitment. And with the commitment comes a certain amount of dedication and a certain amount of responsibility to what you want to do. And therefore, that is one of the greatest things. So this passage, 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, really gives you an opportunity to grow in this love that Christ has for you as a couple and as a family, and how you can love Him back through this love. Okay? And something very important, I kept on, during this talk, kept on saying the presence of Jesus, the love in Jesus in our life. But Jesus is love. And therefore, to better understand this passage, you can just read it again or reread it, removing love and putting the word Jesus there. To give you an example, Jesus is patient, Jesus is kind, Jesus does not envy, Jesus is not rude, Jesus keeps no record of wrongs, Jesus rejoices with the truth, Jesus always protects, Jesus always trusts, Jesus always hopes, Jesus always perseveres, Jesus never fails. So you actually see that if this is the relationship that Jesus has with you, this is the love that He has with you, it's but natural to say, if I'm receiving so much of love in and through my spouse, or opening myself to receive so much of love from God, I need to love Him back. I need to make that responsibility and commitment to loving Him back. Because if He is love, His presence means His love is there in you. It's just that we have so many blocks that happen in our life that stop us from seeing this love that we have in us and stop us from loving people back. So that is something very important, my dear friends. This passage can be something that you can actually live out in your life, make it a kind of structure or a particular goal towards which you can move. Because the more you try to make these characteristics part of your life, the more you'll be able to grow in perfection of the love that Christ has for you. Now, so again, as I mentioned, it's not easy. Every time you make an effort to practice this love, to show this love, you need to first start it off by praying for God's grace. So when you make a commitment to each other, say, let's try this particular characteristic of His always perseveres. First, seek God's grace. And then say, how do I move ahead with this? What can we do? And even if you fail, don't worry. Don't expect it to happen overnight. You will make efforts, you will fail, you will make efforts, you will fail, but at some stage there will be something steady coming out of it, and you will find a certain perfection already working in your marriage, in your relationship as spouses, and in your relationship as a family. Now, a very important thing here is simply, okay, let's put it this way. To summarize what I've just said, is that the core of everything is that your marriage or the sacrament of marriage reflects a covenantal bond. So the same bond that God has with His people, the same bond that Christ has with the church, is the bond that you are expected to reflect in your marriage, because you're not just saying I do to each other every day, you are saying I do to receiving Jesus in your life, and you're saying I do to loving Jesus back. Okay. Now, Amoris Laetitia 73 points to something very important. Christian marriage is a sign of how much God loved His church, how much Christ loved His church in the covenant sealed on the cross. Yet it also makes that love present in the communion of spouses. So the ultimate love that Christ has for us is the cross. The agape love that I just spoke about and the qualities that we mentioned are some aspects of this agape love. But this love is called to be reflected in communion of spouses. So the same love that Christ has for you, which is shown on the cross, is the love that He has for you even now, and expects this love to be shared in communion with each other as spouses and with communion with each other as a family. And therefore, the most beautiful thing is when we look at this aspect. So when you are able to open yourself to the experience of Jesus in your life, experience of His presence, His love, and when you are open to sharing it with others, sharing it, or rather loving Him back by sharing it with others, you, my dear couples and families, become witnesses to the presence of Jesus in your life. And so, my dear couples, the ability or the grace to receive God's love in your life and to be witnesses by sharing it with others is what the gift is. When we say the sacrament of marriage is a gift, this is the gift. It is the gift to be able to experience God's love in your life and to be able to witness it by sharing this love with each other. Thank you and God bless.